The first taste of the new world was salt and vomit. Alex clawed his way onto the beach, his lungs on fire, expelling the last of the Pacific Ocean from his body. The sand was coarse, a mixture of white coral and black volcanic grit that scraped his raw hands. He lay there, a piece of human wreckage spat out by the storm, listening to the two sounds that would become his entire universe: the relentless, indifferent crash of the waves and the frantic, ragged pumping of his own heart. He pushed himself up. His body was a map of new pains. A deep cut above his eye pulsed in time with his heartbeat, sending a warm trickle of blood down his face. He looked around. Paradise and hell were the same place. A perfect crescent-shaped beach was hemmed in by a wall of jungle so dense and green it looked black. The sky was a vast, empty, brilliant blue. He was alone. The chartered fishing boat, the Serenity, was gone. His three friends, Mark, David, and Sarah, were gone. The storm had taken them. It had taken everything. He screamed their names until his throat was a shredded mess, the sound swallowed by the roar of the surf. There was no answer. The first day was a blur of shock and disbelief. He walked the length of the beach, a mile-long curve of sand, searching for debris, for another survivor. He found nothing, only splintered pieces of wood and a single torn life vest. The sun was a brutal physical force. It beat down on his exposed skin, turning it from pale to pink to an angry, blistering red. Thirst came next, a dry, rasping need that made his tongue feel thick and swollen. He remembered a survival show he'd half-watched once. Water. You find water first. He staggered towards the jungle wall. The transition was abrupt. One moment he was on the blindingly bright beach, the next he was plunged into a deep, humid gloom. The air here was thick and still, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The sounds of the ocean were muted, replaced by a new kind of silence, a watchful silence. He found water, a small brown stream trickling over moss-covered rocks. He fell to his knees and drank, scooping the water into his mouth with his hands. It was lukewarm and tasted of dirt, but it was life. He spent the rest of the day building a crude shelter, a lean-to made of a large piece of driftwood and woven palm fronds. It was a pathetic defense against the unknown, but it was something. It was an act of defiance against the crushing indifference of his new reality. As darkness fell, the jungle changed. The watchful silence was replaced by a cacophony of unseen life. Clicks, chirps, rustles in the undergrowth. And something else, a low, guttural cough from deep within the trees. A predator's cough. Alex huddled in his shelter, shivering, not just from the cold night air, but from a profound, soul-deep terror. He was no longer at the top of the food chain. He was just meat. Days bled into a featureless week. Hunger became his constant companion. It started as a hollow ache in his stomach and grew into a ravenous, cramping beast that never slept. He ate the rubbery meat of coconuts he managed to knock down from the trees. He found small, bitter berries that made his mouth pucker. He was a starving animal foraging for scraps. His body began to betray him. The cut on his forehead became infected, a swollen, pus-filled ridge that throbbed with every beat of his heart. The sunburn on his back blistered and peeled, leaving raw, weeping patches of skin. He grew thin. His ribs became a washboard under his skin. His mind began to fray at the edges. The isolation was a form of torture. He started talking to himself, his voice a strange, hoarse sound in the oppressive silence. He would have long, detailed conversations with his missing friends, arguing with Mark about sports, laughing at one of David's bad jokes, telling Sarah how much he missed her. He knew he was losing his grip, but the alternative, the silence, was worse. He made his first kill on the 10th day. A large, brightly colored crab scuttled out from under a rock. He stalked it, his heart pounding. He brought a heavy rock down on its shell. The crack was loud and wet. He used a smaller, sharper rock to pry the shell open. The meat inside was white and translucent. He ate it raw, not caring about the sand or the guts. The taste was sublime. It was the taste of survival. The act of killing, of taking a life to sustain his own, changed him. A small, hard knot of something cold and practical formed in his gut. The man who had been a software engineer in San Francisco, who ordered his groceries online, was dying. A new creature was being born in his place. One day, while exploring a rocky outcrop at the end of the beach, he found it. A cave. Not a large one, but deep enough to offer real shelter from the sun and the nightly predators. And inside the cave, he found something that made his blood run cold. There were markings on the wall, crude charcoal drawings. They depicted stick figures and a boat that looked disturbingly like the Serenity. But there was more. The drawings told a story. They showed the stick figures from the boat meeting other stick figures, taller ones who seemed to come from the jungle. The drawings became more frantic. They showed the boat people being chased. They showed one of the stick figures lying on the ground, surrounded by the taller figures. The final drawing was a single, horrifying image. The tall figures were gathered around a fire, and they were roasting a stick figure on a spit. Alex backed out of the cave, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was not the first. Others had been here, and they hadn't survived. They had been hunted, eaten. He was not just stranded, he was in a cage, and the cannibals were out there somewhere in the green darkness. The island was no longer just indifferent, it was hostile. Every shadow in the jungle now held a potential threat. Every strange sound was the footstep of a hunter. His paranoia became a finely honed survival tool. He moved with a new stealth, a new awareness. He stopped talking to himself. The time for ghosts was over. He needed to be silent. He needed to be invisible. He began to set traps, simple ones at first. Pits with sharpened stakes at the bottom, hidden on the paths leading from the jungle to the beach. He made a crude spear, its point hardened in the fire he had finally learned to make. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a warrior, preparing for a war he knew was coming. He found the first sign of them a week later. A footprint. It was in the soft mud near his stream. It was a human footprint, but it was wrong. It was too long, the toes too splayed. It was the print of a foot that had never known a shoe. He knew they were watching him. He could feel their eyes on him when he went to the stream for water. He could sense their presence in the trees when he gathered firewood. The hunters were closing in. The confrontation came at dusk. He was in his cave, sharpening his spear, when he heard a sound outside, a soft scraping sound. He peered out. 3 figures were standing at the mouth of the cave, dark silhouettes against the dying light. They were tall and lean, their bodies covered in mud and crude painted symbols. They carried long wooden spears. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but he could see their eyes. They glittered in the firelight, cold and hungry. Alex's world narrowed to the cave entrance. The fear was a white-hot fire in his chest, but the cold, hard knot of the survivor took over. He did not scream. He did not run. He gripped his spear, the rough wood a familiar comfort in his hand. He was not a software engineer anymore. He was an animal in a den, cornered and ready to fight for its life. The first cannibal lunged forward, his spear held low. Alex parried the thrust with his own spear, the wood clashing with a loud crack. He drove the butt of his spear into the man's gut. The cannibal grunted and stumbled back. The other 2 came at him then from both sides. It was a chaotic, brutal dance of jabbing spears and grunting bodies in the flickering firelight. Alex was outmatched, but he was fueled by a desperate, primal fury. He broke one man's spear and drove his own into the cannibal's thigh. The man screamed, a high, piercing sound, and went down. The third cannibal, seeing his companion fall, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was the opening Alex needed. He charged forward, not with his spear, but with the heavy rock he kept by his fire. He brought it down on the cannibal's head with all his strength. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The man collapsed without a sound. The first cannibal, the one he had winded, was now back on his feet. He looked at his 2 fallen comrades, then at Alex, who stood panting, his body splattered with blood, the rock held ready. The cannibal's eyes widened with something Alex didn't expect to see. Fear. The hunter had become the hunted. The cannibal turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the jungle. Alex was left alone, standing over the 2 bodies, his chest heaving. He had killed. He had killed men. A wave of nausea and revulsion washed over him, but beneath it there was something else. A dark, terrifying thrill. the thrill of victory, of survival. The next morning he faced a new kind of horror. The bodies of the two cannibals lay where they had fallen. The jungle had not claimed them. The flies were beginning to gather. He had to dispose of them. He couldn't bury them in the hard, rocky ground near his cave. He had to drag them away. As he pulled the first body by the ankles, an idea took root in his mind. A monstrous, unthinkable idea born of starvation and the dark logic of his new world. He was starving. The coconuts and berries were not enough. He was growing weaker every day, and here was meat. A lot of it. He tried to push the thought away. It was a line he could not cross. It was the final taboo. But the voice of the survivor, the cold, practical creature that now lived in his gut, was relentless. "This is not murder," it whispered. "They tried to kill you. They would have eaten you. This is not a man. This is protein. This is fuel. This is life." He spent the entire day in a state of agonizing indecision. He sat in his cave, staring at the two bodies, the voice in his head a constant seductive murmur. He looked at his own emaciated body, at his protruding ribs. He felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. By the time the sun began to set, the battle was over. The software engineer from San Francisco was dead and buried. The creature of the island had won. He built up his fire until it was roaring. He used a sharp piece of flint to do the work. The process was a clumsy, bloody, horrifying butchery. He tried not to look at the faces. He tried to think of it as just a task, just meat. He cooked the first piece on a flat rock over the fire. The smell was rich and savory, and it drove him to a state of near madness. He ate it ravenously, the hot, greasy flesh burning his mouth. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. It was the taste of damnation. The act changed him irrevocably. A part of his soul died on that beach. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a cannibal. He was one of them. He spent the next few weeks living in a state of numb, efficient brutality. He hunted, not just fish and crabs, but the other inhabitants of the island. He became the apex predator. He stalked the cannibals, his former hunters, through their own jungle. He learned their paths, their habits. He was better at it than they were. He was smarter, more ruthless. He killed them one by one using the traps he had built, using the element of surprise. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for dominance. He was eradicating the competition. He found their village, a small, squalid collection of huts deep in the jungle. He found their larder, a pit filled with the gnawed bones of their victims. He saw a piece of a familiar-looking belt buckle among the bones, marks. He felt a surge of cold, pure rage. He showed them no mercy. He burned their village to the ground. He killed the last of them, a woman and 2 children, without a flicker of remorse. He was the king of the island now, a king of ash and bone. He lived like this for months. He grew strong. His body, once soft and civilized, became a thing of hard muscle and scarred skin. His mind, once filled with code and spreadsheets, was now a finely honed instrument of survival and violence. He had forgotten what it was to be human. One day, he was on the beach, looking out at the empty ocean, when he saw it. A boat, a small white sailboat, heading towards the island. For a moment he felt a flicker of something, hope, rescue, a return to the old world. But the flicker died as quickly as it came. The old world was gone. He was no longer a part of it. He looked down at his hands, calloused and stained. He thought of the things he had done, the things he had become. The boat anchored in the bay. A man and a woman, tanned and smiling, rowed a small dinghy to the shore. They looked like tourists. They looked like food. Alex watched them from the cover of the jungle. He felt the old familiar hunger stir in his gut. He watched as they set up a small camp on the beach, laughing and talking, oblivious to the predator watching them from the shadows. He saw the woman, her skin soft, her body healthy. He saw the man, his guard down, his back to the jungle. Alex hefted the spear he had made. It felt perfectly balanced in his hand. The last vestiges of the software engineer from San Francisco screamed in a silent corner of his mind. This is wrong. These are people, innocent people. But the king of the island just smiled. He was hungry, and the sea had provided. He stepped out of the jungle, a dark, savage figure against the brilliant white of the sand. The couple looked up, their smiles freezing on their faces. The woman's eyes widened in terror. The man started to stand up. Alex raised his spear. He was home. The man's name was Tom. The woman was Jessica. Alex learned this from their wallets after. The act itself was a blur of brutal, efficient motion. He was on them before they could scream. Tom went down first, the fire-hardened point of the spear taking him in the throat. The sound was a wet, gurgling crunch. Jessica had a moment, a single frozen moment of pure, uncomprehending horror in her eyes. Then Alex was on her. It was not a fight, it was an execution. He dragged their bodies into the jungle away from the pristine beach. He left their little camp untouched. The brightly colored tent, the cooler filled with beer and sandwiches, the portable speaker playing soft, happy music. It was a scene of idyllic vacation, now a grotesque, silent monument to a double murder. The butchery was easier this time. He was practiced. His hands moved with a cold, familiar skill. He had a system now. He wasted nothing. He felt no remorse, no guilt, only a kind of grim satisfaction. The satisfaction of a craftsman admiring his work. He feasted. He ate until he was sick, his stomach, long accustomed to scarcity, rebelling against the sudden abundance. He sat by his fire, gnawing on a cooked bone, the grease running down his chin. He was the master of his domain, the unchallenged ruler of his small green kingdom. He explored their sailboat. It was a treasure trove. Canned food, bottled water, clean clothes, a medical kit, a flare gun, a satellite phone. He looked at the phone for a long time. He could call for help, he could leave this place, but the thought held no appeal. What was waiting for him back in the civilized world? An office, a mortgage, traffic? He was a different creature now. He had been remade in the crucible of this island. The old world had no place for him, and he had no place for it. He took the supplies he wanted. The medical kit, the canned goods, the flare gun. He put on a pair of Tom's clean shorts and a t-shirt. The soft fabric felt strange against his rough, scarred skin. He felt like an ape in a tuxedo. Then he systematically destroyed the boat. He smashed the satellite phone against a rock. He punctured the hull with his spear. He watched as it slowly filled with water and sank into the clear blue water of the bay. He was erasing the last link to his old life. He was burning his bridges. He was committing himself completely to the island. His new life fell into a routine, a brutal, simple routine. Hunt, eat, sleep, patrol his territory. He was an animal living an animal's life. The ghosts of his past, of his friends, of Alex the software engineer faded into nothing. There was only the present, the sun on his skin, the hunger in his gut, the thrill of the hunt. One day, while tracking a wild pig through a part of the jungle he hadn't explored before, he found something new, a structure. It wasn't one of the cannibals' crude huts. It was made of stone and weathered wood, half swallowed by the jungle. It looked ancient. He entered it cautiously. The air inside was cool and still. It was a single, large room. In the center was a stone altar, stained dark with old blood. The walls were covered in carvings. They were the same style as the ones he had seen in the cave, but far more detailed, more sophisticated. They told a story. A long, terrible story. They showed a group of people arriving on the island centuries ago. They were not shipwrecked. They had come here deliberately. The carvings showed them building the altar, and they showed them offering sacrifices, not to a god, but to the island itself. The carvings depicted the island as a living entity, a great, hungry beast. They showed the jungle's vines wrapping around the sacrifices, pulling them down into the earth. They showed the people eating the strange, vibrant fruits that grew from those spots. The carvings showed the people changing. They grew taller, leaner. Their faces became distorted, bestial. They were becoming the cannibals. They were adapting, evolving, becoming a part of the island's horrific ecosystem. The final carving was the most chilling. It showed one of the transformed people, a figure that looked like a king, sitting on a throne of bone. And kneeling before him were new arrivals, shipwrecked sailors, the cycle. The island was a trap, a Venus flytrap on a planetary scale. It lured people in, it fed on them, it changed them. Alex was just the latest in a long line of victims, or was he? He had not been changed by the island's fruit. He had changed himself. He had killed the cannibals. He had broken the cycle. He was something new. He left the temple, a new, cold understanding dawning in his mind. He was not just a survivor. He was an anomaly, an invasive species that had overthrown the native predators. He was an usurper. The thought did not frighten him. It thrilled him. He was more powerful than the cannibals. He was more powerful than the island's slow, creeping influence. He was the new god of this place. His reign was a long, solitary one. He lost track of time. Years might have passed. He was a creature of legend, a ghost that haunted the jungle. His body was a tapestry of scars. His mind was a quiet, empty landscape devoid of memory or regret. He was no longer Alex. He was just the hunter, the eater, the king. Then, one day, the world changed again. He heard a new sound. The sound of an engine, not a boat, something in the air, a helicopter. It flew low over the island, a noisy metal dragonfly. It landed on the beach in the same spot where he had first washed ashore. Men came out. They were dressed in military-style gear. They carried rifles. They were not tourists. They were professionals. Alex watched them from the jungle. They set up a camp. They had scientific equipment. They were an expedition. They were here to explore, to catalog, to tame. They were an invasion. They were trespassing in his kingdom. The old hunger, the old thrill stirred within him. These men were soft, civilized. They were overconfident. They were prey. He would watch them. He would learn their routines. He would test their defenses. He would hunt them, one by one. He was the island's immune system now, the ultimate predator. He smiled, a slow, joyless stretching of his lips. The cycle was not broken. It was just about to begin again, and this time, he was the one on the throne of bone. The new men were a curiosity. They were organized, disciplined. They moved with a purpose Alex hadn't seen in a long time. There were 5 of them. One seemed to be the leader, a man with a graying beard and a hard, commanding voice. Another was a scientist, constantly taking samples, peering at things through a small microscope. The other 3 were soldiers, their eyes always scanning, their rifles always ready. Alex watched them for 3 days. He was a ghost in the trees, a phantom in the undergrowth. He moved with a silence born of years of hunting. He learned their patrol routes. He learned their guard rotations. He learned who was the most alert and who was the most careless. They were an intrusion, a dissonant note in the silent, brutal symphony of his world. Their voices, their laughter, their radios crackling with static. It was all a profanation. They were a contamination. And it was his duty to cleanse his kingdom. He chose his first target, the careless one. A young soldier who would sometimes wander a little too far from the camp to relieve himself. Alex prepared his trap, a simple but effective pitfall, lined with fire-hardened bamboo stakes, concealed with a thin layer of leaves and soil. He waited. Patience was his greatest weapon. On the 4th night, the young soldier took the bait. He stepped off the main path into the trees. There was a soft crackle of leaves, a single choked-off cry, and then silence. Alex listened. He heard the shouts from the camp. He heard the other men running towards the sound. He slipped away into the darkness, a ghost in the night. The next morning, the mood in the camp had changed. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a tense, fearful alertness. They had found the body, or what was left of it. They now knew they were not alone. They knew they were being hunted. This pleased Alex. Fear was a seasoning. It made the hunt more interesting. He decided to play with them. He left them gifts, a necklace of human finger bones strung on a vine hanging from the flap of their tent, the flayed skin of a large lizard pinned to a tree with a crude spear, the skin arranged to look like a human face. He wanted them to understand the nature of the beast they were dealing with. He wanted them to know that he was not just an animal. He was an artist of terror. The men started to break. The scientist became jumpy, constantly looking over his shoulder. One of the soldiers began to argue with the leader, his voice high with panic. Their discipline was fraying, their civilized veneer was cracking. Alex could smell their fear. It was a sweet, intoxicating scent. He chose his next victim. The scientist. He was the brain of their operation. Without him, the others would be lost. Alex didn't use a trap this time. He used stealth. He shadowed the scientist during a sample-gathering trip. The man was accompanied by a soldier, but they were distracted. Their attention focused on a strange, phosphorescent fungus. Alex moved like a phantom. A single swift blow to the back of the soldier's head with a heavy rock. The man went down without a sound. The scientist turned, his eyes widening in terror. Alex was on him before he could make a sound. He didn't kill him immediately. He dragged the unconscious man deep into the jungle, to his larder, his abattoir. When the scientist woke up, he was hanging upside down from a tree branch, his hands and feet bound with vines. Alex was sitting by a small fire, calmly sharpening a long, thin shard of obsidian. The scientist began to plead. To beg. He offered money, power, anything. Alex just listened, a curious, detached expression on his face. He wasn't interested in a conversation. He was interested in an experiment. He wanted to see what a civilized, intelligent man would do when faced with absolute, inescapable horror. He began his work. It was a slow, meticulous process, a work of art. He was not just butchering a man, he was deconstructing him. He was taking him apart, piece by piece, while he was still alive. He started with the man's feet, a single, precise cut to sever the Achilles tendon. The man screamed, a sound that was music to Alex's ears. He worked his way up the body, a calm, methodical butcher. He was a god, reshaping his creation. By the time he was finished, the scientist was no longer a man. He was a grotesque, living sculpture of pain and terror, a testament to Alex's power. He left the man there, still alive, a screaming, bleeding warning to the others. He knew they would find him, and he knew what the sight would do to their morale. It would shatter it completely. The remaining 3 men were now in a state of full-blown panic. They abandoned their camp, their expensive equipment left behind. They were trying to make a run for the beach, for the helicopter extraction point. They were a herd of frightened animals stumbling through a jungle that was now their enemy's home turf. Alex hunted them for sport. He didn't need the meat. He had plenty. He was hunting for the sheer, exhilarating joy of it. He was a cat playing with mice. He picked them off one by one. The second soldier fell into another pit trap, his screams echoing through the silent jungle. The leader, a man who had once commanded others with an iron will, was reduced to a weeping, terrified child. Alex found him huddled at the base of a banyan tree, sobbing. Alex ended his misery with a single merciful blow. Now there was only one left. Alex didn't know which one it was. He had lost track. He followed the man's trail to the beach. The man was standing by the water's edge, waving frantically at the empty sky, screaming for a helicopter that would not come. Alex stepped out of the jungle, his spear held ready. The man turned, and Alex saw his face. He was young, the same age Alex had been when he first washed ashore. The same terror was in his eyes. For a single, fleeting moment, Alex saw himself in the young man, a ghost of a memory, a flicker of an old life. The man fell to his knees, his hands clasped in a gesture of prayer. "Please," he sobbed. "Please, I have a family." Alex hesitated. The word family was a foreign concept, a meaningless sound from a dead language. He looked at the man, a soft, weak creature of the old world. He felt no pity, no empathy, only a faint clinical curiosity and hunger. The hesitation passed. He was the king, and the king was hungry. He raised his spear. The scream was cut short. The cycle was complete. The silence returned, a deep, profound silence now filled with the weight of Alex's complete and total victory. He was the undisputed master of the island. He dragged the last body back to his cave. The feast was a celebration, a coronation. He was a god, and this was his sacrament. He spent the next cycle of seasons in a state of solitary majesty. He was the island, and the island was him. He knew every rock, every tree, every secret path. He was a part of the landscape, a force of nature. He no longer thought in words, he thought in instincts. In hungers, in the rustle of leaves and the scent of blood on the wind. He had become a perfect, efficient predator. The human part of him, the last vestiges of Alex Vance, were a fossilized remnant buried under 100 layers of savagery. He was happy. It was a strange, primal kind of happiness, the happiness of a wolf after a successful hunt, the happiness of a shark in a blood-filled sea. It was a happiness without complexity, without doubt, without regret. He was pure, he was free, but the world outside his kingdom had not forgotten. One day, a new sound intruded upon his silence, a sound louder and more powerful than the first helicopter. He looked up and saw it. A large, military-grade transport helicopter flanked by two smaller gunship-style aircraft. They did not land on the beach. They hovered over the center of the island, ropes dropping from their bellies. Soldiers began to rappel down, dozens of them. They were clad in black tactical gear, armed with automatic rifles. They moved with a terrifying, coordinated efficiency. They were not an expedition, they were an army. They spread out, forming a perimeter, their movements precise and professional. They were not hunting, they were exterminating. Alex watched from a high ridge, a cold, unfamiliar feeling stirring in his gut. It was not fear, it was anger, a deep, territorial rage. These creatures were infesting his kingdom. They were a plague, a new kind of prey, more challenging, more interesting. He would have to adapt his tactics. He was one against many, but he had an advantage they could never have. He was the terrain, he was the jungle, he was the monster in the shadows. The soldiers were good, but they were men. They were bound by rules of engagement, by radio chatter, by a chain of command. Alex had no rules, he had only instinct. He began his war. It was a war of whispers and shadows. He used the jungle as his weapon. He created diversions, leading them into ambushes. He used his knowledge of the island's natural traps, the thorn-choked ravines, the treacherous mud pits. He was a ghost, a rumor. A soldier would go on point and simply disappear. A two-man patrol would be found later, their bodies arranged in a grotesque tableau. He was a psychological weapon. He left their comrades' flayed faces pinned to trees. He hung their entrails from branches over their main paths. He wanted to break their morale, to turn their discipline into terror. He wanted them to know that they were not fighting a man. They were fighting a demon. The soldiers, for all their training and technology, were not prepared for this. They were fighting a war against a single, invisible enemy who knew every inch of the battlefield. They started seeing things in the shadows. They started shooting at rustling leaves. Their radio chatter became frantic, filled with panicked reports of a ghost or a demon. The hunters were becoming the hunted. Alex felt a godlike power. He was a force of nature, an antibody purging a disease. He was the island's righteous fury. The commander of the military force, a grim-faced colonel named Marcus Thorne, watched his men being picked apart. He had seen war in deserts and cities, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not a man he was fighting. It was a legend, a nightmare made flesh. He realized that conventional tactics were useless. You couldn't fight a ghost with bullets. You had to burn down the forest to kill the monster within it. He made a call on his satellite phone. A single, cold command. "Initiate protocol, Chimera." Alex, watching from a distance, saw the transport helicopter return. It wasn't carrying more soldiers. It was carrying large, cylindrical canisters. It flew low over the jungle, spraying a fine, colorless mist.